Okay, so forest biomes obviously are those that are predominated by trees. Biomes are pretty much identified by the type of trees that live there. I'm going to go ahead and take rainfall. That is one of the main primary factors that influences it. But really what we're looking for here is, like we saw with deserts, grasslands as well, as latitude. So whether or not they're at the, what? What's this latitude? Tropical. And then what's this area right here? Huh?
Wait, what? Are you the Earth?
It's not on me, on the Earth. Tropical.
Oh, that's not poles.
The equator doesn't go up and down.
No, this is the poles.
No,
Anybody?
temperate.
It's up there, temperate, thank you.
Jeez.
So, tropical, temperate, polar, right? Alright. So, in the tropics, we see they are broadleaf evergreens. That is correct. They keep their leaves year round. I'm going to go ahead and you'll get the point, but I'm going to go ahead and use the term perennials because evergreens is usually associated with. It's still an accurate term. I think there's two ends. I'm not sure. Somebody can help me out there. Spell check me, please. Perennials. Perennials are plants that live through year round. They don't drop their leaves, things like that.
Wait, is that
Okay.
P-E?
P-E-R-E. I don't know if there's two N's or one. N-I-A-L-S.
Wait, there's like plants.
But the idea here, listen up. Yeah.
So there's plants that don't drop their leaves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Which would be an evergreen also. That's another. Now the only reason why I put this up there is because most people associate evergreens with your coniferous things like your pine trees and stuff. But these, of course, they don't have to worry about freezing in the winter. So they're going to keep their leaves year round. They're going to try to maximize their absorption of sunlight because, of course, this is the most intense sun that you have here, plus plenty of water. So you've got that part covered as well. So they're going to try to suck as much as they can out of the ecosystem and produce biomass and tissue right from there. So these are the most productive as well as the most biodiverse terrestrial ecosystems. Okay. So you got your trees, of course. Fast-growing hardwoods. Usually hardwoods take decades to grow. Some of the rainforest hardwoods are almost mature before they're 50 years old, and that's unusual for hardwood-type trees. They have a lot of vines. Vines are well adapted to the tropical rainforest because of the fact that sunlight is one of the main limiting factors in a rainforest. That might seem counterintuitive because they are at the equator where the sun is most is strongest. But when these trees grow and they've got these big leaves and stuff, they quickly produce quite a bit of shade. Okay, so plants, in order to get the sunlight they need, if they're not a tree, then they have to get somehow to get up there to get in the sunlight. And vines, of course, can crawl along and use the trees or other things to make their way up, and vines grow quite rapidly as well. So you see a lot of vines in these areas. And there are plants that do live on the forest floor. They a lot of times will have variegated color patterns. In other words, they won't be all dark green. They'll have different types of phytochromes absorb the filtered sunlight that comes through and everything like that, and well adapted for that as well. When you get interior plants here that people use inside, a lot of times these are from the forest floor of the rainforest because they're adapted to it, because there's not a whole lot of light once you get down there on the forest floor. It's pretty dark actually, even during the middle of the day. So those are the main things in which the way that the producers are adapted for that particular environment. With the consumers, they have to be adapted first of all to being able to eat the main producer. So of course the trees do produce fruit and things, but you remember I talked about trees versus grasses. Trees are more productive, but grasses are more edible. So there are certain things like enzymes and stuff. You get a lot of insects. You get a lot of things like termites that can eat the wood, break down that wood, and other kind of things. Or the termites, of course, they have it's not an amoeba, but it's a protist that lives inside their intestine that allows them to digest wood. And so you have adaptations like that. Transport in the trees. Now we're talking about consumers, which would mean animals. What does this mean? Tree transport. That's a good guess. That would actually be an adaptation for the plants as far as seed transportation. But how about getting around on the forest floor? Do you see a lot of antelope running wild in the rainforest?
Maybe.
No. Why not? I mean, how easy is it to get around on the
It's
forest
really
floor?
crowded.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Have you ever seen the things where, like the Survivor things, where they put them out in the rainforest or something? It's like impossible to go 10 feet because there's so many vines, so much vegetation and stuff. So things move around from tree branch to tree branch, right? So we get, for example, one of the main types of mammals that you'll find in the rainforest? Monkeys, right? Monkeys, of course, are well adapted to swinging and hanging, and many of them, the ones in particular live in the rainforest, that tend to have prehensile tails. You've got snakes; they can go on the branches and things. You've got the flying squirrels and things that can glide through the canopy and other kinds of things. So you have maximized transportation with that's tree growth. So that's important. You also see toxin resistance. Now listen up. This is a pretty interesting thing that happens, and I think pretty interesting part of the subject of evolution. Something called coevolution. And coevolution is when you have two organisms that are adapting with relationship to each other. Now, it's easy to see in things that are mutualistic, like bees or bats and flowers, and that they have specialized, proboscis or whatever, very long tongues to get in there and lick up the nectar, and then they of course then help the plant to fertilize, to cross-fertilize. But there's also a competitive type of coevolution that takes place when two things are basically battling against each other. And in the rainforest, since there's so many insects that are trying to eat these trees, all the different parts of the trees, unlike the grasses, which recover well from that kind of consumption, these don't. And so the trees have produced a lot of toxins to do that. There's a lot of toxic plants in the rainforest. That's why they go there to find medicines. And so you get insects that have evolved resistance to those toxins. And so it goes back and forth. The plant will produce a new toxin. They'll get an insect that is immune to that. And natural selection will cause that insect to populate more, and so forth, back and forth. And you tend to end up getting some very toxic plants as well as toxic insects. And also the things that eat the insects. As a matter of fact, there's one little very brightly colored creature that lives there in the rainforest that is poisonous. Not so much with the newts.
The frog?
Yeah, the frogs, the poison dart frogs. Okay.
Green and orange.
Well, they have a lot of different colors.
Blue.
Some are blue. All right. So anyway, enough about the colors.
Yellow.
Fact is, these animals, like a number of toxic animals, like the blowfish, listen up, please, are only toxic because of what they eat. And their way of dealing with those toxins that they're getting from these toxic bugs that they're eating is to excrete them out through their skin. That's the toxic part of them. Has it served them well as a warning to keep them from getting eaten? Yeah, perhaps, So it's double duty there, but it just basically is a way. Remember bioaccumulation? You deal with things some way. Now with amphibians, they can excrete it out of their skin pretty quickly because that's like a main type of organ for them there. They're not going to do the same things we do with it, but same thing. That's like I said, that's what makes them toxic. And like the blowfish in areas like the Indian River here, where they're not eating toxic coral, you can eat them without having to worry about the fugu poisoning. But
Wait, so
that's a different
if
subject.
you own one of those dart frogs, they're not actually poisonous, and you have
That's absolutely correct. You can raise the dart frogs and stuff in their own environment where they don't have toxic food to eat, and they are not toxic. Yeah.
But they can be colorful, right?
Yeah, they'll still be colorful. All right, listen up. Last column here. Pay attention, please. Soil composition. Folks affected by decomposition, but soil characteristics. The rainforest soil is actually quite thin and not very nutrient filled. Surprisingly, a lot of people would think it's very good, very rich, but it's not because you have very rapid decomposition because of the hot weather and lots of rain. So the bacteria and funguses break it down very quickly. You have a lot of denitrifying bacteria in the rainforest, and then so you have so much rain that the erosion both washes the soil out as well as leaches the minerals out of the soil. So rainforest soil is actually pretty weak. That's why you get another thing. Let's go ahead and put this in here, by the way. One type of plant that's very common in the rainforest are epiphytes. As we call them, air plants sometimes. And the reason why they call them air plants is that they don't actually root in the soil. Our Spanish moss is an epiphyte, by the way. And these typically, a lot of these grow in the trees. They'll grow on the branches of the trees and stuff. And since they don't have soil, it doesn't help much to be down there in the soil of the forest floor anyway, because it's weak anyway. But they will then, their leaves are designed to trap water, and then bugs will come in to drink the water and stuff and hang out in there, and some of them are going to die there, or leave their waste products at least. And that is the fertilizer source for these plants. Bromeliads, for example. Anybody have bromeliads as a
They
plant?
look like bromelates.
Huh?
I say bromelates.
Bromeliads.
They look
is
like
the-
bromelates.
Okay, the way to pronounce it is bromeliads. But
I will continue.
anyway, you notice how they're like the water collects in them and stuff. That's part of what I'm talking about. It's their own water supply, keeps it there, so they don't need soil to hold the water, and also stuff goes in there and bugs and stuff, and that provides a fertilizer. So it's an adaptation. Any questions about the rainforest? Yeah.
Like the epiphytes, they're like bushes, like they're at like trees that are adapted.
These are plants that don't need to live in the soil. They tend to live in the branches of the trees. Think of Spanish moss, like we have in the oak trees and stuff around here. Okay. All right. Deciduous forest. Now these are ones that decide to drop their leaves every year. They do have broadleaf trees because they do have a relatively hot summer. Usually, they tend to have a pretty high to moderate to high amounts of rainfall. Not quite as much as the rainforest, of course, but pretty good. And they get snow a lot of times. Snow is a type of precipitation, so that helps the trees as well. And since they do have a relatively long summer, they are going to use broadleaves to maximize that. The latitudes are such that they can still get a fairly intense sunlight during the summer. But winter comes, and that's a liability to have these water-filled leaves on your tree, so they drop them. Before that, what happens? Nick? Before they drop the leaves.
I'm assuming that they just collect water while they're gone.
Okay, no, we're past epiphytes now. We're on deciduous forest here, so let's keep up. Anybody, what happens to them? What happens to the leaves before they drop them?
They freeze.
They turn different colors, right? Yellow, red, purplish, actually. This is, I think, kind of a really interesting adaptation in that they switch to a different type of phytochrome, which chlorophyll is a phytochrome that they're using during the summer.
Teachers and students excuse this interruption. At this time, all testing students have been released from the media center. They should be arriving back to your classrooms in the next 3 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, so what happens during the fall is, of course, the sun, as we go towards winter, the sun is at an ever-increasing angle, right? So that means that the sunlight has to go through more atmosphere. What happens to sunlight when it goes through a thicker atmosphere than when it's overhead and going through the least amount of atmosphere? We see this at sunset and sunrise also.
Weaker.
It is weaker, so that's true.
Right?
What happens to it?
Diffuse.
You're close. Diffuse, it does do some diffusion. It's also starts with a D. It happens to light as it goes through different materials. Physics people?
Yes.
What happens in a prism? To light. It gets diffracted. Okay? So as the sunlight, this is what happens, of course, during sunrise and sunset when we see all the pretty colors and we see the sun's a different color and it's bigger and stuff. That's because it's going through a thicker atmosphere. Well, same thing, even at noontime in the fall, the sun's going through more and more atmosphere as it comes to these trees, and therefore it is diffracting. We don't see it so much. Of course, in the sunrise and sunset we do, but it's still a different wavelength of light, and therefore these colors actually adapt better to those wavelengths of light. We see the same phenomenon with coral reefs, because the algae in the coral reefs has got to stay down there with the coral reef. It can't do like plankton, or it can't grow up like kelp to the surface, so it has to use the sunlight that is going through the water. Water diffracts that sunlight even more, and so it uses a wide variety of these chemicals. They're dyes, basically. Chlorophyll, xanthophyll, Dr. Phil? I don't know. There's another one. That's probably not it. But it uses those because they can better utilize the different wavelengths of sunlight that's getting, because it's going through In this case, through more atmosphere. In the case of the reef, it's going through water, which diffracts it even more. So that's why we get different colors, and makes nature beautiful, of course. And it works. That's what's great about nature. What kind of consumer adaptation do we have? Once again, hibernation gets cold, so you see that some of that, a lot of migration. You know, it doesn't get super cold, and you're close enough for a lot of species to be able to migrate into more tropical areas as well. So it's pretty common in these type of habitats, and you get a lot of adaptation to deal or to utilize the leaf, not leaf lettuce, leaf litter. And you guys maybe, hopefully remember we did a little free response question about that, about the worms that are eating the leaves on the forest floor and stuff like that. This particular ecosystem, it is well adapted to. That's a big phenomenon there, having almost all the trees in a forest drop their leaves at about the same time. That's a huge amount of biomass that goes on the forest floor that has a number of different effects on the physical characteristics of the forest floor. And so everything, of course, is then adapted to that, whether it's burrowing down in there, whether it's eating the decomposing leaves themselves, or whatever else. So you see that. You also, because of that, have a very thick topsoil, very nutrient-rich topsoil from these decomposing leaves.
I think it's like Malaysian Airlines stuff.
Okay? So that is your typical deciduous forest. Questions? All right, finally, taiga. This is our Christmas tree forest, our coniferous forest. It is a subpolar, I'll take Arctic. Not exactly right, because we also have some in the southern hemisphere, although most of them are in the northern hemisphere. So it's subpolar. What's your polar biome? Well, we got the north and south pole, but what is the biome that is not just ice? Yeah, the tundra. Very good. Thank you. So this is a little bit below that, latitude-wise, or closer to the equator, latitude-wise. It gets enough precipitation. It gets lots of snow, and so that's enough to support trees. They do tend to be your evergreens with needles that are filled with sap. They don't get, that much sunlight, direct sunlight, because of their latitude, so they don't need broad leaves, or they wouldn't help them that much. And of course, these would end up freezing in the winter. So needles and sap, they don't freeze that well. And then you have also animals that are adapted to the really cold. Now this is really cold, not as cold as the tundra, but definitely colder. Yeah, now the moose, how's the moose adapted?
Well, because they have a lot of fur and they can eat the needles.
The second one is actually the more of it, and I guess they have their whole bodies covered with fur. I don't know, I think it is, but yeah, moose are one of the few animals that can eat pine needles. Still on planet Earth, didn't you? Or did you? Okay.
Yeah,
That's good.
About the taiga, there's like a whole thing on the taiga and the Arctic tundra.
Right. So we might watch those if we have time. So anyway, fat and fur, of course, those are your main insulators. You do have hibernate. You have hibernation. You also have some burrowing here, although not as much as you might as in the tundra. No, not moose. But of course, it's a pretty dense forest, so it's hard to burrow, as you might imagine, in a forest with the roots of the trees and stuff there. But that is also an adaptation. And like Caroline's told us, the moose and other types of animals are specifically adapted to consuming. Not a whole lot is that edible on a pine tree or a spruce tree or something like that.
The birds can
With
eat
the little berry
and
things, yeah.
Their beaks go like this,
Yeah.
and it opens it up, and their tongue goes.
Yeah. They excite you.
Yeah, it does.
All right. Now, because of the slow rate of decomposition, because it's cold, the topsoil is not that thick, and also you don't have, the needles stay on most of the year. You do get, of course, some of them fall off, but not anywhere near what you get in deciduous forest. And then also needles, they're very high in sugar content. And when you have a high sugar content, bacteria will break that down and make acids out of it. That's why you got to be careful with, sugar will rot your teeth. You have things that you leave in there for a while. The bacteria that like to eat sugar will produce high levels of acid. Same thing happens in the soil here. So acidic soils don't hold minerals very well, so it's kind of weak soil, but it's enough for these trees. So it's nutrient based. I don't know what that means.
You said that.
Nutrient based soil? What would that mean? Nutrient poor soil. So not the greatest soil out there. Any questions about forests? Forests.